The PICO Neo 4 is a fantastic VR headset, a huge step up from the PICO Neo 3, specs that mostly dominate anything in the standalone VR market right now, a huge and still growing library of top quality VR games, a form factor that's uniquely eye-catching, and a price point that's aggressive enough to grab the attention of anyone interested in picking up a new headset anytime soon. But it's not a Quest 2 killer. I would go as far as to say it isn't even a Quest 2 replacement, because although it's better on paper, there are some nuances and factors that need to be taken into account, factors that I will of course dive into in this video. Now it's worth bearing in mind I'll be approaching this from the perspective of a gamer. I love VR tech, but its primary use case for me is gaming. If we were talking purely technical specs, then yes, the PICO Neo 4 is mostly better than the Quest 2. However, when we take software, sunk cost fallacy and exclusive experiences into account, the decision between the two devices becomes a little murkier. The PICO Neo 4 is available now across Europe, Japan and Korea. It starts at £379.99 for the 128GB version and jumps to £449.99 for the 256GB version. It uses the same Snapdragon XR2 Generation 1 chipset that's found in the Quest 2, and it pairs that with 8GB of RAM. It uses pancake lenses with a resolution of 2160 by 2160 or 2K per eye, can achieve up to 90Hz refresh rate, and has a field of view of 105 degrees diagonally, meaning the FOV not only looks wider but taller as well. The lenses can also be adjusted using an IPD tool accessed from the system settings on a sliding scale of 62mm to 72mm. It also has a single camera color pass-through and will be supporting hand tracking at some time after launch. When I first removed the PICO Neo 4 from its box, I was immediately taken aback by just how nice this headset looks, and then again by just how small and light it is. The PICO Neo 3 felt like a strange carbon copy of the Quest 2, with minimal aesthetic changes to set it apart. The Neo 4, in comparison, feels like its own entity. It feels like PICO are really starting to find a voice for themselves and want the PICO to look uniquely different from the current market leader. The shiny black faceplate does attract fingerprints more than a matte finish headset, but I'll take that if it means I get something which looks as cool as this. The unit itself is incredibly small. When placed next to a Quest 2, it's quite remarkable how outdated the Quest design immediately looks. The PICO manages to be about half the size whilst packing in all the same features plus a few additional ones. However, despite being considerably lighter and smaller with a battery pack in the head strap for better weight distribution, I still find wearing the PICO Neo 4 uncomfortable for any longer than around 20 minutes at a time. I've certainly been spoilt by all the third-party accessories that adorn my Quest 2, there's no denying that, but even the stock kit of the Quest 2 didn't dig into my face in the same way the PICO does. This is very much a personal nitpick. Perhaps my cheeks are weird or my face is the wrong shape, but I can feel the PICO's facial interface pushing into me whilst I'm playing, and I'm often left with those dreaded red indentations that VR is synonymous with. This issue will obviously be solved by a suite of fantastic third-party accessories, but at this stage it remains to be seen whether PICO will be popular enough to drive a wave of these options to the market. With the increased demand for the headset at launch, I would certainly hope so, but there's no guarantee right now. One thing to point out about the headset is its lack of an audio jack. The built-in speakers are superb, but I for one love to play VR with a pair of over-ear headphones to ensure I'm fully immersed with no outside sounds bleeding through. So, on PICO 4, you'll need to buy some kind of USB-C to aux converter or a pair of Bluetooth headphones if, like me, you prefer to play in the most immersive way possible. A strange omission on a headset that has otherwise been designed exceptionally well. The controllers are also a massive improvement over PICO's previous effort. I was immediately put off by how cheap and flimsy the controllers felt with the PICO Neo 3. If you squeezed them a little too tight, it felt like they might crumble to dust in your hands. They felt like that strange third-party controller your friend would hand you and make you play with when you went to their house and played on their console. Cheap and unappealing. The Neo 4 controllers in comparison are a great design and feel far more solid, easily rivaling the quality of the Quest 2 controllers, and in my opinion improving upon them by putting the tracking ring in a much more sensible position, meaning you can bring your hands closer together in games and experiences without the rings colliding and breaking immersion. Tracking on these controllers has also been superb for me. I've seen a few reports of tracking going awry in certain lighting conditions, but this hasn't been my experience at all. Once you've set the system up, which is all done inside the headset, so prepare to keep peeking out to input your Wi-Fi password, you're greeted by an extremely familiar user interface and hub area experience. From the virtual environments to the layout and icons of the floating menus, the PICO Neo 4 looks incredibly similar to the Quest 2. This user interface is the current standard for VR. Laser pointers to select which application you want to open, a flat floating menu in front of you, a dashboard along the bottom to quickly jump to and from the most frequently used areas and applications. It's completely serviceable and is definitely the industry standard right now, but I wish personally that PICO had tried to put more of their own unique spin on its UI. Ultimately, it's neither a positive or negative for the PICO. It's a system that works, but I wish VR as a whole would experiment a little more with making these menu systems and hub worlds feel a little more involved and unique. After all, you spend a lot of time looking at these flat floating menus and clicking on things with laser pointers. Surely there's a better way of doing this. Navigating the PICO menus is very fast and snappy. It's noticeably quicker than the Quest 2, which is starting to feel a little sluggish after so many system updates. And loading into games on the Neo 4 is also incredibly quick. For some games, Ultimex was one of the first that I noticed this in, the game has loaded almost immediately after you click to launch it, and jumping back to the home environment again is instantaneous, with no spinning circles or hanging in empty black spaces. It's worth noting that although many of the system settings, home environments and general UI elements of the PICO aren't much different to the Quest 2, there are two things in particular that PICO does straight out of the box, which I think is very nice. Firstly, the headset comes with a suite of entertainment apps already installed and built in. Netflix, Prime Video, YouTube, Disney, they're all here on the headset from the moment you set it up, so you can dive right into watching your favourite content in your own personal cinema. Secondly, you can adjust the IPD or space between the lenses in real time using a slider in the settings, meaning you can find the exact sweet spot for the clearest and cleanest possible image for your eyes without taking the headset on and off to adjust each time. The PICO 4 is an ambitious device. It dares to try and achieve more in terms of field of view and resolution than the Quest 2 whilst running on the same Snapdragon XR2 chipset and an additional 2GB of RAM. This means that while most games immerse you in a taller and wider sense, particularly taller, and they do look a little sharper than their Quest 2 counterpart, they're also prone to the occasional frame drop when running on PICO. I've tested around 20 games at this point, and in a few instances I jumped back and forth between the Quest 2 and PICO to really get a sense of the differences on both pieces of hardware. A few games that run flawlessly on the Quest exhibited moments of jerkiness and frame dropping on PICO. Contractors, Superhot and Green Hell stood out the most for me when testing across both headsets, and Blade and Sorcery, which also struggles to run at times on the Quest 2, seemed to perform even worse on PICO when the action got intense. Is this a matter of the games needing a little more optimization tweaking on the PICO system? Possibly. However, it does feel like a limitation of the current chipset. The PICO is trying to do more with essentially the same GPU, and the result is a less stable experience at times. However, when the games are running well, which is honestly the majority of the time, the increased FOV in particular creates a far less claustrophobic experience than the Quest 2. It's actually odd jumping back and forth between the headsets because immediately after using the PICO and its 105-degree diagonal FOV, the Quest 2 feels much more boxed in. It's the additional height that really sells it. The first time I strapped on the PICO 4 and powered it up, I was blown away immediately by how seamless and far-reaching everything looked. The image filled far more of my peripheral vision, both in terms of width and height, and when this translates into a game that's running smoothly, it's probably the biggest selling point for the PICO right now. An increase in FOV really is magic when you've been used to something smaller for so long. So, better FOV and better resolution sounds like a recipe for a definitively better viewing experience, right? Well, sadly it isn't quite that simple. The display on the PICO Neo 4 is noticeably less vibrant than the Quest 2. Despite the dazzling FOV, images do look a little duller on the PICO. Colours feel slightly washed out and certain elements don't pop anywhere near as much as they do on the Quest. Technically speaking, I'm not sure why this is. It could simply be a symptom of the pancake lenses used here versus the Fresnel lenses of the Quest, but either way it was noticeable almost immediately after the initial wow factor of the FOV wore off. Much has been said about the PICO Neo 4's colour pass-through feature. Many creators have been dazzled by it, and sizzle reels intended to create hype have circulated wildly on social media. However, there is a disconnect between these videos and the experience of actually using the pass-through yourself, and I think it's worth addressing. I will personally struggle to go back to the black and white pass-through of the Quest 2. It's actually a feature I don't use that much. It's rare that I ever see that grainy interpretation of my home surroundings. Should I need to do anything outside of the headset when using Quest, I simply lift it up and perform the task I need to perform, be it adjusting something on my PC, eating a snack, having a drink, checking whether I'm recording, etc, etc. My go-to is to never flick the pass-through on when using the Quest. It's always to lift the headset. On PICO Neo 4, it couldn't be more different. I've used the colour pass-through more in the 2 short weeks I've owned this headset than I've used the pass-through on the Quest since launch. It's crazy what difference a little colour makes, and now I find myself using it to reach for a drink, check the time, or adjust items within my surroundings. It's a welcome change, and as I say, it's one I'll struggle to give up moving forward. But it is not the all-singing, all-dancing experience that the videos shared on social media have made it seem. This colour pass-through is a single camera display, so although the captured 2D videos look great, they aren't a fair representation of what you see inside the headset. The warping is honestly still pretty crazy, and there is no sense of depth. Reaching out to grab a drink is simple enough, but there's a feeling of hesitation as your brain can't quite work out how far you are from the cup. If you saw the videos of this colour pass-through, you'd be forgiven for thinking it could be used for some fantastic mixed reality experiences. But make no mistake, although it's a welcome addition, it's far from the revolutionary step some coverage makes it seem. PCVR on the PICO Neo 4 can be fantastic, but it does require you to make an additional purchase if you want the very best experience. One thing I was incredibly sad to see not carry over to the Neo 4 from the 3 was the DisplayPort connection. This uncompressed wired PC connection sadly doesn't make an appearance here. Instead, we're left with a wireless PCVR connection to Pico's own VR streaming software, a solution which frankly isn't quite ready for the spotlight. When compared to Airlink, I experienced much choppier results, with gameplay stuttering and jerking around as the headset struggled to maintain a clean connection to my PC. The software itself is also extremely basic. Now, I don't think Meta are winning any awards anytime soon for the painfully outdated Oculus PC launcher software, but compared to the Pico streaming application, it looks far more professional and gives you much more control over your overall experience. I know some still aren't sold on the experience that Airlink offers, but for me, it's a clear winner over the Pico wireless VR streaming solution at this moment in time. However, all hope is not lost. The fantastic virtual desktop, which is still the best way to wirelessly stream PCVR games to your standalone headset, is also available on PICO Neo 4. It does require a one-time purchase, but after that, you'll have a headset with a wider, higher field of view and a sharper resolution to play all of your PCVR games, including titles that have since become Meta exclusives, games like Beat Saber, Onward, Population 1, etc. The screen still isn't as vibrant as the Quest 2, but the wider field of view sure does make games like Half-Life Alyx feel even more immersive than any other VR headset in this price range. In the simplest of terms, the PICO Neo 4 doesn't quite do enough to convince existing Quest 2 owners to abandon their current headset and jump to a new ecosystem where they'll have to rebuy all their old games. The gaming experience is almost identical across the two systems, and although PICO does have some awesome quality of life improvements, faster loading times, and an initially dazzling field of view, these don't add up to the value of buying a new headset and all the same games again, when essentially the PICO gives players a near identical experience to the Quest 2, just without the killer apps such as Resident Evil 4 VR, Population 1, Beat Saber, the upcoming Iron Man VR, and any other exclusive title Meta pumps out in the future. There's a sunk cost fallacy issue right now for Quest owners. So much money has been spent building libraries of applications tied to that specific machine. Until someone comes along with a piece of hardware that considerably shakes up the status quo and offers an unparalleled experience, it will be hard to pry those existing Quest users away. However, if you're a new customer looking to get into VR for the first time, or maybe you've been hanging on to your original Quest and want a new standalone device, then you should be seriously considering the PICO Neo 4 as a worthwhile investment. At $379.99 for the 128GB version, the PICO Neo 4 undercuts the Quest 2 in price whilst providing some great features that the Quest 2 does not. Features such as colour pass-through, higher field of view, higher resolution, side loading without enabling developer mode, a smaller, lighter form factor, and more. On paper, PICO Neo 4 has the best hardware right now, but anyone buying into this market for the first time needs to be aware of the power Meta wields with their exclusive development studios. If you're buying a VR headset as a standalone gaming device, then a big part of that decision is the games. Meta currently owns 9 talented VR devs and has them working in-house on experiences and games that you'll only find on Meta headsets. No matter how you feel about exclusives within the gaming space, there's no denying that they can swing a decision when it comes to picking a piece of hardware. The PICO Neo 4 might not be a Quest 2 killer in my humble opinion, but it most certainly is a very interesting moment for this emerging VR manufacturer. It's a moment that shows PICO starting to define who they are and create a product that feels uniquely different to the meta-centric offerings we currently have. It isn't all the way there yet, but the design choices that PICO have made to set this apart from the competition show a company dedicated to standing out in this market, and by the time their next headset rolls around, they could very well catch all of us, Meta included, by surprise.